This is Val, and welcome. This is the Better Divorce podcast, and today I have Ken Gordon with me. Now, Ken works in the medical industry full-time. He's from Charlotte, North Carolina, and he also is a pastor on weekends. Ken speaks on the responsibility of men during and after divorce. He talks about the power of love, of a father's love for his kids, and he really talks about men's responsibilities after divorce. Welcome, Ken, and I'm really excited to hear you talk about your list of responsibilities or the responsibilities of dads after divorce.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Val. It's a pleasure.
Yes. And so when we were setting this up, you mentioned that you went through your own divorce and after a marriage of 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have children.
I do.
And how many kids did you have during that process?
So my marriage yielded two children, two biological children, my son, who is 27, and my daughter, who's 24,
And how old were they when you separated?
12 and 15.
Well, tell us about that. How did that go? Because also you had indicated when we were talking earlier, you were saying before we were recording that you made some doozers of mistakes as well when you were going through that process.
Yeah, I did. I think one of the things, I'm wearing a sweater right now, and the sweater has a big D on it.
Yeah,
And the reason for that is because that's what a lot of people who are going through divorce or who have been through divorce, what they wear around afterwards. They wear this big scarlet D on their chest, and there's a level of shame involved in it. Why couldn't you make it work? Who was the problem? Was it you? Or who cheated? Did you cheat? And we get so caught up in ourselves and become so self-absorbed during a divorce until we 100% forget about the children. We say, oh, don't worry, honey, it's not your fault, but you got to do more than that. And so for me, when I was going through my divorce, I became very, very keenly aware after a little while. It didn't happen immediately, but after a little while, I became really keenly aware that this whole divorce process can completely sweep you up. I mean, I had gotten to the point where I was literally walking around my house putting sticky notes on things that I refused to let her take. And, I'm like, you're not getting this barbecue grill and you're not taking this painting. But the whole while, I completely forgot about my kids and what was my responsibility to them in the midst of this divorce. You said early on, when you were introducing me, that I'm a pastor, and I am, and I've been clergy for over 30 years. And so when divorce came to my door, I was clergy. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I deal with this? And I'm supposed to be the one counseling people not to do it. So I had this big red D that I'm wearing. And there were a lot of people who were like, okay, you can never be my clergyman because you've been through divorce. When divorce comes to your door, divorce doesn't care who you are. If it comes to your door, it's real. And what you've really got to do is you've really got to stay focused. There's an old saying about scorched earth.
Yes.
Divorce leaves scorched earth. And what we've got to figure out when we're as men and women too, but what we've got to figure out if we're parents, how do we leave something living, something alive? How do we not scorch everything? And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. And I think there's a lot of lessons you can learn from people who've made mistakes like me, that if you're willing to give it a try, I truly believe that you can have a better divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you should say that. I mean, we know that the studies say that kids will get over their parents getting divorced. Like they'll be fine as long as the parents let them, in the sense, if mom and dad continue to be in conflict with one another. And children are so emotionally intelligent in a way we forgot a long time ago. And even
Right.
if you're not having these knock them down, drag them out fights in front of the kids, that tension, that the kids just feel it and they know it. I know that when I first separated from my husband, things were really bumpy at first. Oh, they were so bumpy.
Mhm.
And I actually asked my daughter, and she was about 14 at the time, and I asked her, we only have one together, and he has two older ones that I'm very close to, two stepchildren, and they're adults now. And I said to her, did you think it was your fault? And she said, well, yeah. And I thought, how could she think it's, the speeches I've been giving for over 25 years to
Yeah.
people saying, keep your children out of the conflict, assure them that it's not their fault, assure
Yeah.
them they're going to see both of you, assure them that they're loved very much. I missed all that because I was wrapped up in the tension at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's so funny you should say that because as I said earlier, it's got to be more than words, right? To your point, I'm not a yeller. I've never been one who yells and screams and that kind of thing. And so I just kind of believed inherently that my children didn't really see or feel the tension, only to find out later that they totally did.
Yeah.
When I wrote my book, Divorced But Still Dad, I actually asked my daughter, who was 12 at the time, if she would write a chapter in the book to parents, specifically really to dads, saying, here's how your children feel when divorce comes to their doorstep. I didn't coach her. I just asked her to write it.
Yeah.
And when she wrote it and I read it, it brought tears to my eyes because it revealed so much. It was so enlightening in so many different ways. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea you felt like this, or you process things this way, or you saw things like this.
Right.
And I think for a lot of parents, we really don't know and don't recognize what our children see, what they hear, what they feel. And I think we have to be much more intentional about that whole process.
Yes. Now, just for the listeners, you mentioned a book that you wrote. Can you tell me the title of that again? And folks, I'll put that in the show notes for you.
The name of the book is Divorced But Still Dad, Faith Principles of a Father's Responsibility During and After Divorce. I needed to grab it to make sure I got it just right. Divorced But Still Dad, Faith Principles of a Father's Responsibility During and After Divorce.
Oh, that's great. Is that an ebook or is it a hardcover? Or if I link this in the show notes, would that be something that people could obtain?
Yes, it is an ebook, and it is also, it's actually a soft cover, but it's available on, you name the bookstore and the electronic bookstore. But yeah, it's available on all of the above.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. And just to give us a highlight of that, what would you say, your favorite tip from your strategies?
When I talk about Divorced But Still Dad, the biggest thing I would say when we talk about the dad's responsibility is to remember that you're a dad, whether you are married to their mother or not. My biggest tip to men is don't divorce your children because you divorced their mother. There you have it.
Yeah, you're still the dad. And that's just great. And sometimes people lose sight of that for a period of time, and it's interesting, as I'm recording this, it's 4 years and a bit after I separated from my husband. We're not formally divorced yet, haven't gone around to that, but, separation agreement all done. And we're friends, like friendly, and of course that's really, and our daughter's 19 now, and that's great. But, he checked out kind of for a bit, but then not really, which has really benefited the children. Now, I'm curious, go back to this letter that your daughter wrote. She wrote the letter when she was 12, or she wrote the letter from the perspective of when she was 12?
No, when she was 12.
Okay.
And so she was actually 12 years old at the time she wrote it.
Wow. And that's in the book.
It's in the book. It's one of the chapters in the book. Yes.
Wow. Okay. I'm so curious. And what was your biggest takeaway in terms of what she was saying?
I think my biggest takeaway was the fact that children see and feel more than we give them credit for. They are emotionally intelligent much more than we think. We believe that we are great actors and actresses. We think that we should be on the silver screen because we're doing such a great job of pretending. And that's one of the reasons why I will tell you, Val, that I tell people all the time, don't stay in a marriage for the children. Don't stay married because, you don't want to hurt the kids, because the kids see it already. They feel it already. They sense it already. And so my biggest takeaway from what my daughter wrote is that she saw and felt way more than I gave her credit for, and was suffering as a result of it. My children tell me all the time now that, I've remarried and my wife's name is Leslie. And they tell me all the time now, they're like, Dad, we've never seen you this happy. You were not this happy with Mom. And we are so happy for you.
That really gives me goosebumps. And going back to the things about, staying together for the sake of the kids. Well, first of all, like, what does that teach your children about relationships?
Right. Exactly.
This is one of the regrets I have, is that I didn't accept that my husband didn't want to be in the marriage anymore for way too long.
Sure.
So it taught my daughter, that it was acceptable to live in a certain home environment that sucked.
Exactly.
And, one of the tests, I read this once and I thought, what we don't heal in our own lives, we pass on to our kids so they get to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, think about how you're living your life right now.
Yeah.
And would you want your child to be living that kind of a life right now?
Exactly.
So I think that's and I read that relatively recently, and I really wish I did it a lot sooner. you
Yeah,
know,
that's very
and
profound.
yeah, it really, really is. And I mean, of course, kids are resilient and all of that.
Mhm.
And coming from a pastor, don't stay in a marriage for the sake of the children. That's a big thing to say. And it's absolutely correct if you're putting children front and center in terms of wanting them to have successful lives, successful relationships, and happiness and live in functional families, because that's what we really
Exactly.
want. And
Exactly.
and I was also thinking too, is that, when we try to put on that brave face, like,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
faking it, we're also teaching our kids to fake it when something
We
else,
are.
rather than acknowledging the pink elephant in the room,
That's
this is
right.
what's going on and talking about it.
I agree with that. I think as parents, we've got to teach our children how to be real in relationships, how to constructively handle disappointment, how to constructively handle failure, how to
Mhm.
constructively handle emotions that are not always positive. And I think
Mhm.
the answer to that is not to hide and it is not to lie. I
Yeah.
think it's to face it, to own it, and to determine how to become a victor, determine how to grab victory out of whatever it is, as opposed to just kind of shrinking back and becoming a victim of it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's great. And so in terms of your kids, how are they all doing now? The two of them.
Well, I will tell you this. Divorce takes a toll on children. It just does. And I haven't figured out the magic potion to give to a child that washes away what that looks like, right? And
Yeah.
what that feels like. And so with my children, it is an ongoing, very intentional process for me to help them heal. One of the
Mhm.
biggest things that I will tell you that I'm a very big believer in, and I get it to say this as a pastor, is I'm a huge believer in clinical therapy. And I
Mhm.
say it
Mhm.
like that because too many times people go to their pastors to get therapy, but that's not where they need to go. They need to go to
Right.
a clinical therapist. And again, I'm a pastor. I have a PhD in counseling. I have a PhD in communication. So I can say to all the other pastors, I've been to seminary, the whole 9 yards. And so I get a chance to say this. What can you say to me? Right.
Right. Yeah.
But too many times we go to pastors thinking that because they are messengers of God, that they automatically know how to heal the mental issues or mental health issues that we deal with, and we don't. And
Right.
so one of the things that was very important to me with my children is ensuring that they went to therapy, because I
Mhm.
needed them to be better. I needed them to be okay. I
Yeah.
needed them to learn coping skills and learn how to compartmentalize the things that they saw and felt in the relationships, in their parents' relationships, do it in such a way that they were not doomed to repeat it.
If you like what you see here, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so you will be kept apprised of every time I release a new video. And last but not least, if you want to leave a comment, be sure to do so because I will always respond.
Both of my children, they still struggle with it. Both of them still struggle with some of the insecurities or with some of the fallout that came from that. From my standpoint, I've been fortunate enough to find the love of my life and someone that I love dearly, and they get a chance to see that. They see a functional relationship that is Christ-centered, love-centered, and it is not dysfunctional in any way. But just like with every other parent out there, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. So just because they're young adults now doesn't mean that you're done as being a
No,
dad.
absolutely not. Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
they're adulting, and a lot of times now they're really, really looking at, my son, he has children of his own now. Now he's really starting to see some of what I said to him, right?
Yeah.
He now has a son, he now has a daughter, and now he's like, boy, Dad, now I get it. Now I understand. And, as they continue to move on in their lives, as they have their own children, as they finish college, as they, get jobs or whatever else, parenting is, and that's one of the reasons why it is so critical to figure out a way to co-parent effectively,
Yeah.
because they need the benefit of both insights from mother and father.
Yeah, that's right. And when you separated from your former wife, what was the parenting plan in terms of the schedule? What did that look like?
So one of the things that I did that was really critical to me, and everyone may not do this, but it was very important to me, is I did not want to go too far from my children. So I actually purchased a house 3 blocks away.
Yep. Mhm.
The house where I purchased was equidistant. The bus stop from their school was equidistant to both of the houses. I spent a significant amount of money when the separation occurred to ensure that the house where they were living, I had it, almost completely redone. I did that on purpose because I didn't want them to go from living in a house with mom and dad where they had everything to living in a trailer, right? Or living in a place where they had nothing. I mean, it was so important to me, Val, until we had a 55-inch Sony flat screen TV hanging in our family room where, we all lived. When the divorce came and I moved to a house, I purposely moved to a house that was not as large. I even bought a flat screen TV that was 50 inches versus 55 inches. It was an Insignia versus a brand name because I didn't want to pass the message to my children that I'm doing better without you. And that was important to me.
Oh, wow. Right? So you didn't upgrade everything and say, look at how great my place is. It infects parents too, right? Where they're kind of in a place of transition, and often people's spending changes as they're going through that process. Even if they might have been frugal, they might be way less frugal, like all that kind of stuff, right? So that's just so interesting that you actually purposefully, didn't upgrade everything, because you probably could have, in the sense that, I mean, if anything, the probably, but from the time you bought the original flat screen, it wouldn't be that much expensive to get, because the prices of those went down so much, right? And then in terms of the schedule, was it like a week on, week off, or was it something else, or what happened?
No. So it was, because we were so close, it was generally, we went every other week as far as where they stayed. And because we were so close, they would stay at my house a week, her house a week, and we just alternated like that. It was important to me to ensure that their bedrooms at my house had everything that the bedrooms at the other house had, all the same comforts. I didn't want them to feel like they were in a foreign place when they came to my house. I even took them with me to pick out all their furniture. I wanted them to pick out furniture and everything that they put in their rooms that was comfortable for them and made them feel like they were at home.
And I think that the very fact that you made that effort went a very long way to them too. Like, I'm sure, like you said, like it still has impacted them, but the fact that, I mean, there's a lot to be said that when a parent really tries and demonstrates that unconditional love, it really goes a far way, doesn't it?
It does, but I will tell all the parents out there, it doesn't happen immediately. It takes time, and you have to give your children time. When the divorce came, my children didn't speak to me for about 3 or 4 months. It was because they listened and heard everything their mother was telling them about how horrible a person I am and how it was all my fault and everything that I did wrong. And she shared with them a lot of information that she should not have shared. All of it was not true, but she demonized me in a lot of ways. And my family, they were absolutely livid. They were like, tell your kids the truth. Tell them that you didn't do that, or tell them what. And I said, no, I won't. I will not, because I need my children to figure this out for themselves, and they will. I'm just going to stay true to who I am. And so one of the things my daughter actually wrote in the chapter is, in the beginning, my daughter said she wanted me to deny all of the accusations that were made. But when she would come to me, I would say, honey, that's not your business. That's between your mother and me. Whether I did or did not do it, it has nothing to do with our love for you. And she said she got so angry with me, and she was like, then he obviously did it. Right. Right. And so, but later she figured out that, you know what? I'm glad he didn't do that, because what she said was, my father allowed me to remain a child.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And that was important to her. And now that she is an adult, she looks back on that, and she has very different feelings now between the two parents, between the one who tried to force her to deal with adult issues and the one who allowed her to be a child. And that matters.
Yeah, it really does. And that, I mean, obviously their mom wasn't able, because sometimes people just aren't able to see past their own pain.
They're hurting.
And they don't realize how much that hurts their kids. And it sounds to me like you just didn't give them the easy answer, and also respected your daughter enough to know that she would come to her own conclusion.
Right.
I think that I was, again, the first year after we separated, I slipped on that for sure. One time at Easter time, we do Ukrainian eggs. It's a tradition in our family. And I had texted, it was our first year apart, and I had texted my husband to say, oh, we're doing eggs. Let me know if you want to come by. Just a terse response. No, I'm doing eggs at my sister's house. Okay, that's fine, right? But And then he dropped her off one afternoon. She comes in, she goes, Mom, you've got to start being nicer to Dad. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, I said, what makes you say that? And he said, well, I invited him in to do an egg, and I invited him to color an egg with me, and he said that you wouldn't like that very much. I showed her the text. Right? Because it's like, because
Right.
she's like, I like the idea better. It is really powerful to say that's between your mom and me. But yeah, that's great. Yeah.
But I'll share this with you as well. The other thing that I also did with my daughter, even in the midst of that, is when she shared with me her frustration between what one parent did and the other parent, I challenged her. And I said, what gives you the right to judge? You can't judge your mother because of what she said and how she said it, because you have no idea of her pain. You can't walk in her shoes, so you don't have a right to judge her and say that what she did was wrong or anything else. Until you have walked in her shoes and until you have experienced her pain, you don't have the right. And so for me, even though I knew what was being done and what had been done was wrong, I needed my children to understand that they don't get to sit in the seat of judgment on their parents, whether we're right or wrong. Because today she may be wrong, but tomorrow I might. So be careful of encouraging your kids down one road to judge and to deal with something, because if you do that, then that may very well come back on you.
Well, and it teaches compassion. My first legal assistant I ever had, she always used to say, there, but the grace of God go I. And I remember just going, and to have your daughter understand that or learn that as a teenager, beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. And my son was very different, because I raised my son in a way that said, no matter whatever happens in life, always protect your mother, no matter what, whether it's from me or anyone else. And so my son gravitated to her and was anti-me for years. And I got it. And I remember one day very specifically, there was a family event that was going on, and we invited his mom. And she showed up. I guess it was awkward for some of the people that were there. But my son, he actually went over and he actually knelt down by where his mother was sitting and kind of took this kind of aggressive pose, kind of like he was protecting her. And I thought to myself, good job. Because I've always felt like boys should always protect their mom, no matter what. So it took him a little while longer until he really saw things a little differently and a little more clear. But again, I didn't give up, and he did, no doubt about it. And the thing that I believe is that kids have what I believe to be unconditional love for their parents. Even when their parents are wrong, they still want them to be right. And I don't want to do anything. I don't now or at any point in the past. I don't want to do anything to hinder that, because whether we worked out in the relationship or not is not important. What's more important is what is our individual relationship with our children, and post-divorce, what is our collective relationship and co-parenting going to look like? And in all of those cases, we should always keep the children as the main thing.
That's wonderful. And I just have to say this, is it's interesting that even though your son was aligned with his mom during that time, and it took him longer to see things more clearly, he actually obviously was embodying the values you taught him.
That's exactly right.
I'm so glad you joined me today. Thank you so much. And is there any other pearl of wisdom that you'd like to add? You have so many.
Well, I will just say this. I think there are a number of different things that I talk about in the book that all came from my personal experience. But one of the things that I do talk about is something called playing hide and seek. And what I mean by that is, okay, the divorce is final. We're both moving on. Be very careful of what you let your children see in your relationships going forward. Your children have part of their self-esteem is embodied in who each one of the parents are. And if they see their father as an example, just going through woman after woman after woman after woman, then that affects their own self-esteem.
Absolutely.
If they see relationship after relationship, failed relationship after failed relationship, or dysfunctional relationship after dysfunctional relationship, it affects their psyche. And so I tell people all the time to be very careful about what your children see of your relationships post-divorce. And the last thing that I would say is, when it comes to what do you say to your children about the other parent, about the person that you're divorcing,
Yeah.
I tell people to always remember that your children are 50% you and 50% the other parent. And so if you talk negatively about, in my case, about their mother, what I'm actually really doing is talking negatively about half of who they are. Children don't forget that. If you demean their mother, you are in essence demeaning them because they're part of their mother. So be careful about what you say about your spouse. There's certain information your children don't need to know, whether they are 12 or whether they're 32. They don't need to know. There's some things, you just always remember that divorce doesn't just affect you and it doesn't just affect your ex. It has profound impacts on your children, and you can make a difference in that.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just so glad.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. You've had so many pearls of wisdom to share, which is so great for someone who's been down there. I just love what you're saying about how you set up your new home. Wow. And getting your daughter to write the letter. It's just so amazing. Even though your son wasn't talking to you, you could still see him with your values. And so well done. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
So if you like what you see here, hit the like button, subscribe so you can be kept apprised of all my new content as soon as it's released. And if you want to know more, go to thebetterdivorceproject.com. That's thebetterdivorceproject.com. You'll find tons of treasures on that site, including the ability to sign up for the Better Divorce Project newsletter, where you will find helpful tips, strategies for helping you through your separation and divorce.